episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show. Today we have another really fascinating guest for you, helping to create a better tomorrow on many different fronts. And we're going to be getting into some really unique, we'll call convergent themes that some which we may have independently touched on previous episodes, but not yet in this integrated fashion. And I'm really excited about listening to the show myself as we go forward. We have the honor of being joined by Dr. Sean Guillory, who is a senior robotics process automation developer at the company Booz Allen Hamilton, which is an American management information technology consulting firm. Dr. Guillory got his start, though, at Dartmouth, where he did his Ph.D. in Cognitive Neuroscience, which was followed up as a postdoc researcher down at MD Anderson Cancer Center, where he was doing some fascinating work on mapping the behavior and cognitive functions in brain tumor patients in order to help protect their brain function during things like neurosurgery. And then Dr. Guillory took a little turn in his career and moved from neuroscience into the area of data and robotics, working at firms like Consumer Affairs, Clear Channel Communications, working in this really unique area known as Robotic Process Automation, this really unique form of automation technology, working in sort of metaphorical robots, artificial intelligence, to do a lot of really interesting tasks for us. And we're going to be jumping into all sorts of themes that have to do with business efficiency and national security and cyber defense, really some really cool topics. So all that being said, Dr. Sean Guillory, thanks so much for taking the time out of your schedule today to talk to us for a little while.
Definitely my pleasure. So yeah, thank you for inviting me.
You know, Sean, I'd love to start things off like we typically do by handing you the floor for a bit. If you could really start off by talking a little bit about yourself, going into your background, everything from where you grew up, how you developed your initial interest, of course, in the neurosciences, and were involved in publishing papers with the topics like exploring emotions using invasive methods, reviewing 60 years of human intracranial electrophysiology, and ultimately how you went from that and got involved in this really other fascinating high-tech area of robotic process automation. I think that might be a great way to start things off and what we're going to be talking about later on in this episode.
Oh, goodness gracious. I think it probably, well, the very, very beginning is both my parents were in the Air Force and they did over 20 years. So I was just a military brat. I still have not in my life lived in a place for more than 5 years at a time. I'm looking to break the record here shortly, but even like after, being governmentally mandated to move, like in terms of like where my parents go, I kind of had, fun in terms of, exploring different things and cultures and whatnot. I feel fortunate in terms of being able to move that quickly because, I hear these stories of, folks that, did something embarrassing in first grade and then, they're like, did they still make fun of you in like high school and that versus, I could do something silly like call me Batman for 2 years and then, I'm not going to necessarily see those folks later. So I had a lot of fortunate kind of like restarts, which helps because I was a really silly kid. I guess closer in terms of like career-wise, how we kind of start. I guess even starting with like funny, I kind of wanted to, like, how can I be funny? And that kind of morphed into, I had this, which I was like all right in high school. But in terms of like starting in college, I just had this like notebook that would just like write all these kind of like funny, interesting things in. That also ended up becoming like the same notebook that I just used for classes and to put notes in. And like in college, I really started getting interested in like different subjects like history and philosophy. And I don't know where the blending came. And I can't point to an exact date, but it didn't take me long to be really interested into the like the academic study of humor and laughter. And an undergraduate, it was really focused on, which my undergraduate degree was in philosophy with a minor in linguistics, because first I was looking at it in terms of non-traditional, like non-Aristotelian kind of logic and like deontic logic and all these kind of different logic to try to like map out like, okay, is it an incongruity thing, a superiority thing, but looking at it in terms of logic and looking at it in terms of linguistics, a lot of acoustic phonetics, kind of like recording to see like, okay, like, can you discern like the difference between like a fake laughter or real laughter, and kind of look at stuff like that. So I was my real first kind of like play with data on that. But one of the things that I kind of wanted to put a theme and really, you know, like put it out there, folks. You know, my undergraduate university is Texas State University, which I'm very, very proud of. Again, if folks out there haven't necessarily heard of it, you know, in terms of size, which, you know, like it's 28,000 people, you know, so it's not like a small university by any means. But in terms of, you know, like known schools in Texas, you know, it's kind of down there. And I remember freshman year going to sophomore year, just, you know, like I was even like in like the psychology, actually the philosophy department with other folks, you know, I think they're still clearly smarter than me. We were looking at like the top lists in terms of philosophy programs in like the whole world. We were like, oh yeah, it'd be awesome to go to NYU, Stanford, Cambridge. But we kind of had this thing where, again, like we were like, oh, but they'll never look at somebody from, you know, a little state school on that. And it wasn't really until, you know, I just kind of took that as a given, like, okay, like there's a limit on where I can necessarily go. I had the fortunate honor of meeting Dr. Alan Hine, who was then an emeritus at MIT's Brain and Cognitive Science department. He came to talk to our school. And I was just like, you know, by that time I knew I wanted to do some probably more in like neuroscience, looking at stuff in terms of humor and laughter. I asked him, I was like, what kind of stuff do I need to do to get into a program like that? He said that you need as much research experience as you can get, you know, like in terms of thesis, you get stuff published, that's even better. And at least like 3 dynamite recommendations, and I'll probably do them. I'm like, okay, the very next day, go over to the psychology department, knock on a couple doors, be like, I never taken a psych class or a stats class or a neuro class, which is the kind of stuff I want to do. I want, you know, if you can let me in your lab, you know, I'm a pretty quick learner on these things. Some doors shut in your face, and that's going to be normal. That's another part of the theme I kind of want to put to folks out there. But one person gave me a chance, Dr. Reiko Graham, and I am thankful for her like every day. She really took a chance on me. She was very, very tough. So it was a learning curve, but stuck with it. You know, in terms of suggesting like you should try to do like summer research. Got the opportunity to work at Northern Arizona University to do like my first kind of EEG work. So that would be like the scalp electrodes with Dr. Chad Woodruff. So I thank him for giving me the chance with some of my background on that. And yeah, I did kind of like first research that in terms of the honors thesis was looking at hemispheric differences in processing. So we had kind of a setup where like, okay, is it pipe into more like left hemisphere or right hemisphere in terms of looking at like studies on that. And during that time, I probably say starting mid sophomore year, I started reaching out in terms of like different kind of graduate programs in terms of this is going to sound weird and but like bear with me. At the time, I tried to find that list again. I don't know if they like changed or just made it better. It just had like every psychology program in the world on LinkedIn, and just like to click over to that. So I'm like, okay, I'll just start here. It just took, you know, like multiple months just going through like, okay, who is doing research that's kind of related to, because, you know, I want to do stuff around humor and laughter if I could. Reach out to folks, tell them like, hey, this is the kind of stuff I'm interested in. This is the kind of stuff you seem to be interested in, where I think we can have interconnections. Are you looking for grad students this year? If so, what kind of stuff do you look for in a, you know, like a good grad student? Reach out to folks. Some folks you never get a response back. Some folks you do. You kind of keep the conversations going until it reaches out to, you know, okay, can we get on a phone call? Or, hey, you're like right up the road, even if that's 500 miles out, you know, can I drive to your lab? Or if it's like meeting at a conference. And I just did that until I got to like the it's probably like final 8 universities. So when I applied, I got, interviews at 7 of them. So I was really fortunate in that regard. So that's kind of like, I guess, the secret sauce in on that in terms of just following up, which I didn't know, like, at the time, I didn't know anything about like networking or anything like that. You'll see that kind of thing in terms of reaching out to folks, kind of not knowing what I'm doing. A couple of times, like, I guess in my career, I just so happened to be doing the right thing in that. But I was fortunate in terms of like the networking interviews. As soon as I went to Dartmouth, I just fell in love with it. I fell in love. Again, I've never been to the Northeast or anything, but it was just this little place. Again, I want to say stuff to humor and laughter. I knew I was going to be on the weird end. I was looking at posters of people studying like vestibular systems in ice skaters. And I was looking at like posters of folks doing, looking and studying like micro expressions on people who just had Botox. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm not going to be weird at all here. I'll fit right in terms of doing stuff to humor and laughter. It just really was kind of like a good fit. So it seemed like it was kind of mutual on that end too, because it seemed like next day I got like, hey, do you want to come? Like, yeah, even if I had like other interviews. So I had that like at a time, all right, I got one more interview. We checked that out, but it's probably going to be a yes. And it was. And Dartmouth was just really good to me in terms of, I think also the fortunate thing where I got one of those National Science Foundation like graduate research fellowships as well. So that kind of afforded me to really do the kind of stuff I wanted to research. And then how do we get to the stuff in terms of like working with neurosurgery patients? It started off purely in terms of wanting to study more on the academic question. It didn't take me too long to be like, oh, if I also want to study laughter, I can't do that in an MRI machine. You'll get ghosting all over the place just from like this kind of little head movement. So I'm like, okay, that's not gonna work. Scalp electrode, again, the stuff that you get like on the face and the even kind of like muscle on the face, it just totally, like trounces anything you're gonna get from the brain. So even like neck movement, it's just too much. But when I discovered that, at least in like epilepsy patients, which that's primarily where I worked, I did a little in terms of deep brain stimulation in grad school, working at Dartmouth Hitchcock, but most were epilepsy patients where they actually go through 2 surgery. And by this point, they're like, okay, this is probably a focal form of epilepsy. We're seeing if we can find anything in terms of dysplasia. And they have 2 surgeries. First one, they open up and they put different electrodes directly on the brain or depth electrodes in there if you're trying to get into like hippocampus. And some places prefer like all depth electrodes, and then some have more of the grids. They have that on. Hopefully it doesn't take more than like 2 weeks of the person having it on their brain, wrapped up and just sitting in their bed to get to like, okay, this is where the epilepsy is coming from. So that's the clinical reason for that. And then once they know exactly where it's coming from with the best spatial temporal resolution possible when it's like right there, the surgeon would move forward in terms of doing the resection, in terms of like really knowing where the dysplasia or whatever is affecting and causing these seizures is. But during that time, you just have a lot of time, when they're just like bored in their bed to work with them kind of doing research experiments. And the thing is, like I said, even when they're having the epilepsy, which is usually like a big motor event moving their whole body, the signal's clear as a bell. So I'm like, okay, anything dealing with like laughter, that's going to be absolutely fine. I reached out to the hospital, which folks in the department were like, kind of good luck in terms of like, you're going to get something. I just got very fortunate that there was a pretty new behavioral neurologist at the time, Dr. Krzysztof Bujarski, who was looking to do stuff like, hey, I want to do like social and emotional kind of like research as well. So I'm like, matchmake. So just sheer luck on that. So I was real fortunate. It was much more of a pioneering effort. We still have research that is coming out, and things are coming out around that as well. But what I kind of learned from that, which kind of brought up to like this bigger passion that kind of even like stays with me to this day, is, let me put it this way, probably in combination of both like at Dartmouth And even at MD Anderson, when I was a postdoc,
Mhm.
probably over 200 patients I worked with, maybe 2 or 3 are like, I don't want to do your silly experiments, which is actually kind of like touching. And like, a lot of folks are like, why would you want to do it? Like, it's a surgery. But a lot of folks just say yes, not like in a course. Like they said yes. And I even asked them one day, like, what are the kind of things that, like made you want to do this kind of like basic research? And the idea being, because I know that the kind of stuff that you're working on will help out the next person that has to be in this bed. And that really was touching in me. And it was something where I don't know if that was the exact moment, but there was a lot of things kind of precipitated around a time where the idea of just doing like basic science research, where for the most part, in terms of like academia, the coin, or at least the mechanism that kind of gets you promoted in the kind of things, is publishing in these journals and like talking at conferences, and that will precipitate bringing in grants.
Right.
It's not necessarily getting it applied and getting it out there to help people. That is, in a lot of ways, that's almost seen as like a distraction. And I kind of knew like, okay, I want to do something that was like much more applied. So yes, was I able to do like really cool research in terms of even kind of like single cell in human kind of research in terms of social and emotional kind of research? Yes, but in terms of finding different ways and different methods to kind of like help out patients directly, that was the motivation. Definitely my ending years at Dartmouth, getting my Ph.D., and then motivating me right into MD Anderson and going after that. So that was a big thing on that. And before I go forward into like the MD Anderson experience and how that leads me into like industry and data science, did you have any questions on that or anything you want to further explore?
No, I'm sorry if this sounds like a silly
Feel
a
free.
silly little addition here,
anything.
but look, there's the old adage that laughter is the best medicine. Did you learn any interesting things about laughter, cheerfulness? I mean, we hear a lot about sort of the psychobiologic component of many diseases nowadays. Did you, obviously, you were focusing on neurosurgery and some of these really complex interventions, but any big aha moments during those 200 or so studies with the different patients that, wow, this is true, laughter is great medicine?
Yeah, with laughter and like the medicinal uses of it, kind of things we were looking at. So we definitely saw some things that were different between like the fake laughter and then like when you're actually able to like capture the real ones by showing them like silly videos or whatnot.
Yep.
Very rare. You'll find this in literature, even going back to like the Wilder Penfield kind of mapping,
Yeah.
where like when you actually get like the stimulation where you actually cause laughter. I probably saw in terms of like the epilepsy patients, maybe once, never in the brain cancer patients. And then like DBS, you get that like every once in a while, especially if you're getting somewhere that's getting close to like that nucleus accumbens or like some of these kind of like more midbrain things. You actually do get that. So I saw that more kind of with the DBS patients with that. And that was always fascinating. But yeah, in terms of like the medicinal uses, you know what, and this is just for the listeners as well, probably the best research you're going to find by that is a guy, a person who unfortunately passed away not too long ago. His name's Hawk Concept, but spelled like JAAK.
Okay.
Look up the ultrasonic vocalization in tickling rats. And I forget exactly what the hertz was, but a lot of the stuff they were using that as kind of like a stand-in in terms of like really like strong affect when they were like tickling these rats. They have these really high ultrasonic vocalizations, and folks like Concept and I want to say Jerry Bergdorf talked to him for a number of years too. But yeah, they would do stuff looking at kind of like the genetics and kind of like the big hormone stuff, and that's not necessarily coming to mind in terms of what the big findings are, but that's probably the best you're gonna like find really looking at those like that kind of like chemical and hormonal aspect, and even some of like the health aspects to that as well. So hopefully that wasn't too much of a diversion, but yeah, like I said,
No,
that's definitely the name to go to for that kind of research.
Interesting.
Looking at kind of like the health aspect of that. There's yeah, like I said, I'll keep it there. If you have anything else kind of like around uh, the health space, you know what? Like there's even interesting things I remember from. I don't know if it was a special kind of narcolepsy, but I remember there's specifically what is Sebastian's last name, but they would do stuff with like working with like narcolepsy patient, and some of the things that would really trigger would be like really strong laughter. I remember, this is just an anecdote, but I remember in terms of him and a collaborator of his would talk about younger people trying to make each other, like they'd have pillows all on the ground, trying to make each other like laugh really hard, and then like the last one standing literally wins. So so I hear even kind of stories about that, and then, you know, there's other things like yeah, but I don't want to go too far because you asked specifically about the health. But yeah, I could talk about like shop around humor research as well. Like I said, it definitely was something that was important, and it also comes back in funny ways in terms of other things in my career. But any other thing before I go more into?
No, I know you're. It's a, you know, laughter and humor is a passion of your story. But yeah, please take us to MD Anderson.
No problem. Yeah, so with MD Anderson, all that really was focused on like, all right, how can I get like better methods and methodology out there to like help out these patients, which top of the line in terms of doing the fMRI, the DTI, which is like looking at the white matter tracks in terms of MRI imaging, doing things in terms of transcranial magnetic stimulation, and having a really good system at that, on top of the things that they're doing with neuropsych before in surgery when you wake them up and do the kind of like stimulation, and then working with them if you have to in terms of neurorehabilitation. Fantastic top of the line sort of thing. And my main thing was doing things to help kind of like if there is a way, you know, improve that in terms of like different protocols. And at the same time, I was very fortunate. It was someone I met through my brother, Wesley Okeke, who was looking to start, before they even had brick and mortar, this business incubator that was aimed at folks who wanted to like have businesses to help humanities in different ways. Which from the folks and the kind of folks that they were talking, which is Fruition Technology Labs, by the way, Fruition Tech Labs is still around in Houston. It was just something where, you know, just hearing folks' story and the kind of things that they'd want to do to like help out in different ways, but not really having luck in terms of finding, you know, like if you want, you know, go Sand Hill Road and be like, I'm the Uber of shipping brownies, you know, you're going to get some coin. But, you know, if you want to do something like a self-filling water bottle that helps, you know, it's very slow, but helps folks, you know, like just in case, you know, they're like in a dry desert place and they need water to live, or a fitness band for pregnant women in the third world, or kind of like things on that like realm. Not necessarily like good luck in terms of getting funding, but you know, I heard out in terms of West vision, and by this point, like I said, all academia, all hospital. So anything in terms of like looking at opportunity, like a business opportunity and what makes a good one, I really wasn't sure, but I really was kind of like interested in that mission. So after my time at MD Anderson, I kind of went full speed ahead in terms of helping out with this business incubator, and that was kind of my first touch of working with data and working with projects, and actually seeing that my skill set actually translates outside of academia, because I did not know. So that's another time I feel like I got really lucky. And it's not something where there is a you know, like a cabal in terms of like psychology or cognitive neuroscience in terms of like, oh, there's nothing outside, and you know, in terms of industry. But you know, the folks that are in academia, at least in those fields, they're in it because they've been successful with academia all their lives, and they really don't know like what's outside of academia. So they really didn't know, even though they were showing stuff like using machine learning algorithms for analyzing brain data. I had no idea that that had like, application and like folks actually wanted that kind of skill set, like in terms of industry and outside of academia. I thought it was just something used for science. In fact, like I said, in the next place, even after working with fruition, uh, they had to explain to me what a data scientist was. And I was just like, oh, okay, yeah, that's something I can do. So that's how like not knowing and whatnot. So I, fast forward a little bit, but like both with neuroscientists and folks in kind of like psychology, I have been trying to play like Paul Revere in terms of like, here's what your skill set can land you outside and other kind of like opportunities out of that. But going back a little bit, again, work with fruition, working with amazing in terms of like different kind of projects, learning in terms of like the marketing and even working with because Houston, while there's not like a strong VC scene, very seed rich because of all the petroleum millionaires.
Sure.
So just reaching out to folks that way and getting these folks at least that kind of like 1-2 year funding to really get started off. And at least in fruition, like once you kind of get that seed funding, you quote unquote graduate, unless you just want to like keep the like the co-working space. That's absolutely fine. But yeah, I really got bit by the bug in terms of like, oh my goodness, this is actually things that like can directly help people quickly. So, I wanted to look in terms of like, all right, what else in industry can I be helpful for? I was very fortunate to meet Zach Carmen of Consumer Affairs. He's the one that explained to me again what data scientist was, and I was just like, sure. And so yeah, I headed up to Tulsa, Oklahoma for a number of years doing that work, which that was fun because they have so many different kind of categories and sectors and different kind of portfolios that they look at in terms of helping people. And there were some things, again, it's just in terms of being a data scientist, the one and only for a little while. And it really was just, all right, here's a problem that this department's having. How can you help in that? It was fun to see where I could apply that kind of like scientific methodology to like some of these things, because even with some of these things, which a big aspect I ended up focusing on was like around sales strategy and helping out with that. There were other kind of like fun ones where like we're doing stuff to like try to catch scammers. But I can talk about that one a little bit later, maybe when we get more into like cybersecurity, because that was kind of a precipitating event on that. But again, like the thing with like sales, but still I think data scientists are kind of weird when it comes to sales and marketing. Like, ugh, like that's that. But when I saw sales, it's kind of like it was like psychology with a scoreboard. I'm like, man, I am hooked in terms of understanding that. So like, I never really left in terms of like the psychology and like how can it be applied to help people behind. In fact, like I said, I think nearly everything I do, that's always not even too much in the background. It's kind of like front and center, but seeing how I could be helpful in terms of, all right, so what is the best for you? Because you'll hear online on LinkedIn or whatnot, like folks arguing like, oh, phones are dead, or social selling, or there's too many people on social selling. But actually doing kind of the methodology work with each individual, like, okay, work with these two methods, but don't use this one for 2 weeks. Then use these two and this one. You can actually like see like, okay, per a sales rep basis, like what are the like best, what are their best mediums in terms of communication, and where are they getting like the most conversions? So just you're afforded that kind of opportunity in industry, where a lot of things, even with like sales, and then even when you get into cybersecurity, like you can't send out phishing emails and an academic saying. Hence, there's not too much academic research in that. There's some good people trying to do stuff like that. Chris Hadnagy comes to mind in terms of he just got an adjunct position, and he's a social engineering extraordinaire. But a lot of these kind of things you are not going to be able to look at in terms of academic sense, but they're obviously important in terms of bigger commerce to the company, obviously. And if one just has like good kind of scientific methodology and bringing that from wherever their kind of background is, you're able to really help people out. And that's that's what I saw pretty quickly, be it with sales, marketing, search engine optimization, even some stuff in call center. Probably my favorite call center thing, which folks, feel free, please study it on your own. But this is the kind of insight that I saw in like a couple of different things. I saw a lot of things in terms of call centers where killing it in the morning and then right before they leave just to make their numbers, like they make their quota, but there's this big lull kind of in the middle. And I remember just one of the things that's, after seeing that in terms of their pipeline, I was just like, why don't you have a morning quota and an afternoon quota? It doesn't even have to be like more, just be like, try to get this many in the morning, just split it in half, this many in the morning before lunch, and then this many before you leave. Triple and quadruple the amount of conversions of some of these kind of like call center related things. And that's all I did in terms of just like setting up the methodology for that. And you can have an immediate impact in terms of whatever you're setting. And that's why I tried to doing that. I had a lot of fun. And then when it comes to at consumer affairs, that's kind of where also the two things I guess that I kind of do kind of like were born in that. One was the robotic process automation, the process automation, low and no code, which, gravitating towards that because, I want solutions where, eventually, it'd be like so easy, like your CXO can do it sort of things. And, they can build it after teaching them. I don't know if I ever got to that point in some of these things. Like, if anything, like complexity kind of got like more and more on top of some of these platforms. But yeah, like I said, that kind of aspect in terms of the process automation, even some of the other things kind of like marrying that to some of the other stuff I'm doing. Did that in terms of, start that in terms of consumer affairs, move that into eventually things around Clear Channel Outdoor, the work company. And even the kind of stuff that I'm doing in terms of my current work right now, like process automation in terms of helping out clients. And there's just a lot of use cases for that where, it's much more simpler than like a machine learning or AI sort of setup. Not necessarily anything you train. It's usually something that's just based on your graphical user interface and kind of navigating on that. There's some things you could do kind of like in the background as well, but and, like running macros if you're doing something with Excel or any kind of like Microsoft product. But yeah, if you have something where data starts here, be it like your email, database, Excel document, some third-party website. We use like Bank of America all the time, like get that data, format it, do any kind of like calculations or equations that you need to, and then post it to wherever it needs to be, maybe into an email or into an Excel document or back in the database, or posting it into some third-party application, CRM, ERP system, whatever you need. And as simple as it is, like I said, there's just a ton of use cases for this in terms of moving that. So yeah, that's been trying to be helpful as much as I can in terms of that kind of work and building up that kind of business. And it was a lot of fun. And the other thing that was really born at consumer affairs was in terms of data science. The one thing that, I'll just tell you the thing that inspired me. Richard Hoyer, Psychology of Intelligence Analysis. It's a book. It's actually a manuscript, I believe, originally from the 70s. So Richard Hoyer, he was a CIA analyst. It was originally like something from the 70s. I think it got public in maybe 1999. And let me kind of juxtapose it with the kind of things I still see with some aspects in data science. A little bit better because folks are looking at things in terms of like the ethics and like what are the kind of biases. But at the time, and still a lot of now, in terms of the aspects of, analyzing the data, really scrutinize the data, doing stuff in terms of like feature extraction and feature engineering, A-okay in terms of the data science route. In terms of the why am I doing this, like what are the biases and heuristics that are really kind of like motivating me to like do this? Is it because like we just had the scripts already? Is that really like the best, reasoning for that? Is it because Google or your competitors use that algorithm or they do it like this, so that's why you're doing it? You really don't even necessarily have a good business case for it. and those kind of things in terms of like what's really guiding why you choose this data set to begin with, or the bigger questions. I don't see it that much in terms of data science. At least then it's gotten better, but in terms of even like since that psychology of intelligence analysis through the field of intelligence analysis methodology, folks in terms of our government have been thinking about this for quite a while in terms of different ways to either address, externalize, and even mitigate the biases that could be affecting their analyses. So I tried to reach out to these different folks in different ways to be helpful on that. I was fortunate enough to be able to work with some grants on that in terms of like different sort of proposals. And that was kind of the birth in terms of how can these like things in terms of psychology and neuroscience and these kind of methodology, how can they be helpful within the defense and national security space? So like from there, it was, okay, in terms of cybersecurity and reaching out to folks on that, discovering things in terms of social engineering, which, like kind of looking at like these different kind of people variables and how can you get to the system. A lot of it's, like email based or getting on the phone based, but there's other kind of clever ways around it as well. But, that was an applied psychology of itself. So trying to be helpful around that. And then at the time, also what they now call adversarial machine learning, but like these kind of first things in terms of hacking these machine learning algorithms, a lot of that kind of first has brought different sort of things in terms of search engine optimization, those kind of SEO kind of methodologies into the picture, and then trying to do kind of like the low code or no code hacks as well in terms of some of these things. A lot of those just messing around with Alexa for the most part, those kind of systems. But yeah, that was kind of like the birth of, all right, how can this be helpful in defense and national security? And that is a big primary question and driver. What I'm trying to do with a lot of work right now, just trying to because like it's not even like a future sort of thing. It's an absolute now thing in terms of things with like disinformation.
Yep.
These things with it could be stuff in terms of human performance and related things, and then also biggie right now would be with the quote unquote Havana syndrome and the diplomats and things going around there, which that's been declassified and put in National Academy of Science, where it's very likely something in terms of directed energy weapons around that, probably something around high power microwaves. But yeah, I'm just trying to do my best in terms of utilizing that background, all of it really, even with some of the humorous stuff when it comes to that, actually helpful in terms of some of the disinformation work, is trying to get people to laugh and seeing if they're trying to be funny or whatnot. That's a big precipitator of seeing if things go viral or not in terms of it being a vehicle to move some of these messages. So yeah, I just try to put it all together to be helpful, including the automation stuff, and where they come together with things like human machine teaming to see, big thing that people focus on would be around trusting these AI systems. Yeah, that's a big part, just getting folks to be like, all right, these things are pretty dang good. They're better than, just human control and that. But it's also the aspect of when not to trust them if they are systems are being manipulated and whatnot as well, which that is a bigger thing, because we're not playing in uncontested EM space anymore. It's something where the kind of near peer adversaries that a lot of folks are kind of focusing on now, they have the toys in terms of the EW weaponry to kind of like mess up our signals and mess up our kind of AI systems. So keeping that in mind as well, that's the kind of things in terms of defense and I think I heard some CNAS guys call it like degradation dominance, as in like when signals are degraded, are you able to still be able to move forward and perform with whatever sort of goals you have in mind? That's going to be the new norm, and that's going to be the new norm for life, where it is going to end up going back to not just totally relying on our information systems, but it goes back to ourselves. It goes back to our brain and cognition and the cognitive domain. So yeah, I try to be as helpful as I can in terms of things around that and the automation. And yeah, I think that takes us pretty close to now. But feel free in terms of anything in terms of the backlog to ask me about that you think either you personally are interested in or what you think your viewers could be interested in as well?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you just touched on actually, because we've heard this from other folks sort of in the AI space over the last several months, is this issue with sort of getting the human out of the picture
Yeah.
versus having that teaming, as you were just mentioning. And I was when I when I was researching and preparing for you, Sean, I went to some really fonts of knowledge in this space like Wikipedia, and there's
Okay.
these definitions. Yeah, we talked about robotics process automation at the beginning, but there's sort of this unassisted robotics process automation
Hmm.
where, as you're saying, getting the human out of there, and this is going to be artificial intelligence dealing with whatever these threats, and we can't, obviously we're not going to go into specific things that you're working on, but what type of things, I mean, do you as you look at these different threats that you have to deal with, whether they're different cyber attacks, different adversaries that are out there, are there specific areas that we should be, some of the stuff that we see in the news in terms of the cyber attacks that are happening nowadays, that we should be not having a human involved in, where the AI should be doing more of the job? Or are you purely in the camp that you have to keep these two things teamed, and then when the human is out of the way in some of this sort of unassisted
Hmm.
robotics process automation, sort of what happens? Does the does the system learn, like, hey, this is country X, and they're trying to do such and such, and this is just a hacker that wants to steal some money, and well, how's it all? I know I'm sort of talking in a couple different
No,
directions
you're
because I'm
good.
out of my space, but talk about some of this, especially as it pertains to national security. Here, sitting here in the U.S., obviously, don't go into anything that is confidential
Gotcha,
per
gotcha,
your
gotcha.
Booz Allen, but please take us on a little journey there.
Yeah, I guess this would definitely be the time where this is like very much my opinion and thinking, and not necessarily in terms of like my employer on this one. So let me definitely put that out there on that. My employer is awesome, by the way. But in terms of that, let's look at it in terms of on our side. Um, I think in terms of that human machine teaming, I think there needs to be more of a conversation, things in terms of like the human with the machine. Let's take it this way. I already talked about the one like, okay, the machine may be getting manipulated or whatnot. Okay, human, you really need to take over. Human, you are getting, based on the biometrics, really overloaded and you're not noticing a couple of things. Maybe that's a time when, you know, AI and the machine learning should kick in during those sort of things. If it's not something where you're seeing like, okay, the system seems to be okay on that, in terms of like being overloaded in that. So it's kind of my thinking in terms of like, all right, where is a human and machine at this time in terms of also just, like how good and how reliable is the different AI system on that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, defensively, it's going to be kind of like all over the place, which I think is something which I don't want to miss. I don't even want to say like it may be this country, but it is out there in terms of a country recently using a drone that was just running
Yeah.
all off of AI. There was
Yeah.
no human in the loop in that in terms of even doing an attack and getting out of dodge. So defending in terms of like, okay, a completely out of the loop sort of scenarios, we may be seeing more of that, and we definitely need to be prepared for that. Doesn't necessarily mean we have to do it on our side, but I do think that's on defensively, we need to look at all the possibilities and how to counteract those. But for our side, there could be scenarios, and I'm trying to think off the top, but again, like when, like if it, AI applications where it's like, okay, like make me, how am I going to look like when I'm 60-year-old? You don't need no dang human in that. But when there is something where there's always like constant lives on the line, I can think real hard, and we can think in terms of like, is there any situation where you want the human totally out of the loop? I cannot think of any right now. I do think that having it doesn't have to be in the loop, but at least on the loop, so to speak, to, stretch an analogy. I think it's always going to be, well, not always, but at least near future, the kind of things I see, that's probably for the best, even if it is like this conversation, be it with the biometrics or whatnot, between humans like really like not ready right now. Let's have some of the AI aspects take over versus AI maybe like, yeah, let's depend more on the human in this one. So I think that kind of conversation is probably best going forward for at least how I can see it.
Gotcha. And, I know that you're, also, as you're mentioning, very interested in utilizing your cognitive neuroscience background and once again, converging with some of these really advanced themes, whether they're cognitive security, cognitive warfare. I know there's a bunch of different areas that you talk about here. Take us, Sean, a little into your future visions, if you could, on where some of this integration potentially could be leading us in terms of tech, new innovation, looking out, I don't know if it's 10 years, 15 years, but with these two really interesting baskets of experience and knowledge, where are we going with all of this?
Where to begin with that one? I would have to say, even in terms of the future, some of it maybe almost playing catch up. And what do I mean by that? If you talk to folks that are kind of like in information operation or information warfare, and then even the EW or the electronic warfare folks, that was a focus in terms of, like our nation and whatnot. Coming in the 90s, cyber is the hot new kid, getting all the funding and whatnot. These other things kind of got deprioritized, but not with our adversaries. They kept going with a lot of these things and tuning these things up. And now, be it with like the disinformation and misinformation aspect, or some of these things that we're seeing, affecting different folks in terms of like diplomats and service people, there's an aspect where looks like it's getting more like foci. Again, very happy about that. But part of it is like kind of like a big catch-up effort with some of those kind of aspects. I'm glad to be like see that going on that. So I think part of the aspect is the catch-up. Some of it is let's pick on the academic researchers again. Making sure, well, let me put it this way. Most of the stuff that you're going to be seeing in academic research in like a psychology or cognitive neuroscience kind of basis, it's going to be, the word that they look for, that they want to have strong, is internal validity, as in very controlled environment in the lab, nothing around, usually just a person and a computer, maybe an eye tracker, or in the MRI machine, and very controlled, everything like the same sort of thing, and try to do as many trials as you can and getting that out there. Does that research translate into the quote unquote real world or in real life? Or like when I see these kind of like things happen, or this phenomena happening in the lab, is that exactly what's happening and what's going to happen in the outside world? Not necessarily. And that would be the externally valid part. And a lot of things, if anything, and Robert Cialdini, who is actually the godfather in terms of like influence and persuasion kind of research, like coming from psychology, he actually has a paper out there talk about like why he doesn't do field studies anymore, and why he doesn't suggest postdocs or whatnot doing field studies, because they take a long time. And the folks that, again, if you're looking to get promoted, you can do probably like 10 experiments and say like 7 of those work in the time of doing like a field study, and it may not work. And you need to have working research to get the degree and to move on. So again, it's been very deprioritized. Again, things that actually work, quote unquote, in the field or being applied. So I think much more research, and again, the kind of stuff you do see that would actually be in industry, they may keep it for themselves in terms of, like, oh yeah, these are things that, like we found out in terms of like our sales pipeline, and it's in our playbooks, but we're not going to like publicly let people know about that. And then even defense is going to be the same thing in terms of doing research that would be more applicable to the different sort of soldiers, warfighters, or whoever it is, in terms of at least knowing that it works in that context.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that more work that is focused primarily on application and as much in terms of field testing as you can, the more of those, the better in terms of this space. And that includes also the equipment as well, because some of these EEG systems, I knew it already, they are delicate. These things can't take a beating well. But if you want that to be like a primary biometric for something like, again, with EEG, you're going to get great stuff in terms of like sleepiness and drowsiness, which is great to know. You can do some stuff even with like the cognitive load stuff that we talked about as well. And then other kind of aspects, you need to have a hardy EEG system that can, take a little kicking. So having kind of like a more resilient kind of like neurotech for some of these different kind of applications in the field, that's going to be something that's absolutely needed as well. And I wonder, well, I know one thing you may want and what the crowd would want, like, what about Elon Musk? What about those implantables? What about stuff like that? I'm actually still at the point I'm pretty bearish on that. Why the heck is that? Because from maybe stuff has changed in like 5-6 years since, I asked like a bunch of neurosurgeons on this, but it's not even like, oh, okay, am I going to get like malpractice lawsuits, or so there's like a fear on that. No, it's not necessarily that, but in terms of putting things in cosmetically and doing brain surgery on somebody that's like not having a tumor or epilepsy, all the ones I talk to are like pretty like, I don't know. So that kind of aspect of, you can see in the literature and some things in terms of cosmetic neurosurgery. I have not met a lot of neurosurgeons that are like really down for it. It doesn't matter if in terms of like, oh, what if there's like a Google sized budget like throwing stuff in. So it's not the money, it's not even like the fear of like, oh, I'm going to do something wrong. Is kind of this thing like this comfortability in terms of like doing surgery as minimally invasive as it is on somebody whose brain is absolutely fine. So I don't know, and like I said, I just haven't seen in terms of context, and I still, there's some context that I could see it, but again, like doing the surgery, so like I can turn off like a light that I can just use my hand. Obviously the kind of things in terms of the which is already being done but before that work, in terms of folks who have kind of like locked in syndrome or paralyzed in different ways. Of course, like that actually has like a big use, but in terms of the neurotypical population where there's nothing going on in the brain, they just want to get kind of plugged into the thing, I'm not sure. And like I said, right now I'm pretty bearish. I'm mainly bearish just because in terms of talking to neurosurgeons, I can't see, I haven't talked to any of them where like, oh yeah, like definitely. So yeah, I guess that would be not to be a party pooper on that, but yeah, hopefully it helps out in terms of like the kind of things I see in the future, which is mainly just saying like these things need to get fixed so we can have a good future on this. And then other aspects where a lot of folks are excited about, stuff like implants. CRISPR definitely isn't there yet in terms of brain kind of related things, so that's not a thing. I put it out there again, if we're talking about future, the aspect of like bioprinting, like different kind of organs or different kind of things like that. I think it's really cool, and I totally visualize something where, okay, you do a resection of the brain, you do a good scan of that resection, and then you can like bioprint the neurons into it, and, instead of leaving just a big hole in there, that'd be freaking cool. I've seen something that's get like close to that, and like, they're going that direction. But I just think that's cool in terms of like not necessarily like evaluating like feasibility around that,
Right.
but I think that's also pretty dang cool as well. So that's more like both the wet and the hardware side of that. And if there's anything in terms of like the disinformation aspect, or performance, or anything else in terms of like these tools, feel free to ask me.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I've done actually a couple shows on actually with a couple with DARPA on a previous platform, and they're in the same camp. That they're working on sort of the non-invasive stuff and how you can get and not have to drill a hole in someone's head. And it was just, it's interesting because another guest I had on several months ago was with this Future of Life Institute up in Boston, and Elon Musk is one of their supporters, and he's really against this. You're mentioning this AI only drone attacks and all that type of stuff. But it's very interesting because I'm glad there's folks like you that are working on thinking about these problems, and not just from the technology perspective, but you have the bioscience expertise, because they're as you've explained throughout this time, they're quite integrated. We have a lot to learn from both sides, and it's really a fascinating set of themes. Anything interesting coming up that you can talk about in terms of conferences you're going to be at, or new meetings? Obviously, once again, I can't get into the national security stuff, but any hot things I can scoop you have a scoop here while I have you?
Let me talk about at least two organizations outside of the firm that I try to be very helpful in. Ooh, you know what? I'm actually going to give you a scoop on a third one. Stay tuned to that. One is the Information Professional Associations, or IPA. It's a lot of folks that kind of they're either former or current in terms of like information operation, information warfare, and a bunch of folks that are just trying to like lead the charge in things in terms of like the cognitive security space, and looking at things like that. They just had their Phoenix Challenge conference not too long ago. And again, if you're a member of IPA, you're able to, get access to these different things. I know they want to do more workshops. I know they want to do like a young professionals kind of program. And then they have an awesome podcast in terms of the Cognitive Crucible, which I think in terms of, I probably say there's like two in the space in terms of, well, this one's definitely like directed in terms of like cognitive security, and that would be Cognitive Crucible through IPA, which is an excellent podcast to check out. The other one would probably be like the Mad Scientist blog that comes through like that program with Army Tradoc. They talk a lot about things around cognitive side as well. It's usually pretty fascinating. So I probably see those two in terms of the space. I think are pretty good. But IPA, in terms of Information Professional Association, like I said, I think it's excellent. Anybody wants to become a member, and they're interested in folks like working in industry and stuff like that. Even that conference, it was really interesting to see some of the industry folks kind of like talk about stuff and like these things with like defense and industry kind of coming together. The other group, which you have to look, and it would be through NATO, but if you look through NATO, if you look at NATO ACT, they have something called the NATO Innovation Hub. And one of the main things that they focus around is cognitive warfare. And they're doing some very interesting, that's more in terms of like, you gotta be like in the gov or, like a national security thing to kind of like get a see at those kind of like workshops or whatnot. They're doing some cool stuff though, like trying to reach out to industry. I think they have another ideathon that they're probably going to put out there probably closer to the fall. So folks interested in that, stay tuned, where they'd probably be interested in folks in like industry in terms of like, okay, what are some good ideas in terms of the space, hearing them out, and kind of getting like publicity around that. So I think they're trying to do more stuff to kind of be like more out towards industry or whatnot, but they're primarily still like defense and whatnot. But I think they have really cool stuff cooking up, and obviously, like I said, helping out not just the U.S. but like all the allied nations are under NATO. So I think that was pretty cool as well. Now the third one just kind of came to mind. It is still being worked on. It's more than like back of the napkin, but it is something where a relationship and another supporter of myself for the longest time has been the Mind Science Foundation, MSF, which is actually based in San Antonio. So I went to school pretty close to San Antonio, and then I'm living there currently right now. Mind Science Foundation has always like continuously looked after me. Even some of like the humor research conferences I was putting on, they were helping out with that in terms of some of the back end stuff. And one of the things that I at least pitched to them, and there seems to be interest, is like I said, throughout all these different things that I did, it always felt like there is a strong or primarily focus on applying psychology and neuroscience to help out like different professionals in different ways. And that's something where I want to get more of that message. Again, like I don't want to keep it all to myself. It's something where I kind of wanted to get that message more out there, both to folks in like the C-suite or brass on the shoulder, like powdered barrister wigs or whatever the case. To be like, hey, these are different aspects that, psychology and neuroscience can help you in that, which some people would know, they may have like user experience researchers, okay. But, they may just keep them straight to working on the website sort of things. But there's a lot of interesting things where that kind of methodology, which is derived from cognitive psychology, can be helpful in different ways. They may have like psychologists and psychology backgrounds mainly focused on one problem, but there's so many different things I saw in terms of use cases where that could just be helpful in a bunch of different ways. So both in terms of getting that information out there and also letting folks in psychology and neuroscience know, so like the grad students or the postdocs or even very early professorships know that there are these folks that could use our help and use these kind of things in terms of helping out their different use cases and problems, and getting it in front of them as well and showing them that there is something also outside of academia where they can use their skill set. So, like, I guess like another sort of thing, even all that, even like why I'd want to do that, which we're trying to make it maybe something like to a podcast. That's what we're trying to work on now, in terms of like exactly what the medium is and getting that, and like getting folks who like have that psychology background or have seen it utilized in their space to good effect and getting them interviewed and showing like it's everywhere. Like, I guess one of the things I just tried to aim at, like why I'm doing that, and even like all this kind of reach out on these sort of things, I guess I almost wanted to be, I aimed to almost try to be like the mentor, like I truly wish I had, like really oversight, because I was fortunate enough with like Dr. Chris Bujarski at Dartmouth in terms of taking me in, but he was never officially my advisor. I had a very, very, very hands-off advisor, which allowed me to do like a lot of things. But for a lot of things, including like postdoc, like there wasn't necessarily someone I had to learn it kind of on my own, or kind of like it was almost like an Oliver Twist, less than Lord of the Flies kind of situation where like grad students and like other postdocs are kind of like teaching each other. And that's how I kind of had to learn that way. But I try to aim in terms of anybody that, I was fortunate enough to work with in terms of like research as like a mentor, or when we get interns for whatever kind of job, I really try to be that. And even, I didn't talk about this at all, but even between consumer affairs and Clear Channel Outdoor, I did a year at Texas State teaching in the philosophy department. And the big thing that kind of drove me towards that, two professors that were really important to my trajectory, they were retiring at the same time, and I kind of wanted to have I always thought teaching was interesting. I kind of wanted to have that, like that Ken Griffey senior junior moment where I'm like, oh, I'm playing with my paw, sort of thing. So I had fun in that, and ended up being like exactly 100 students between the 2 semesters. But yeah, in terms of trying to get them on the right path and always like writing recommendations and trying to be there if they ever have any questions, and just smiling ear to ear, because now it's at the point where like they're off to the races, either to like grad school or law school or in different kind of career options, and seeing that, it's that's really, really fun too. And yeah, just trying to do what I can to kind of share the stuff that I felt like I used the word lucky probably a lot during this conversation, that I was just lucky to kind of come across, and really fortunate to just try to share that with folks so they don't have to reinvent wheels or scrape any knees, or scrape less knees than I guess I had to. So I try to be that for folks as well. In terms, I guess that's another aspect in terms of like what's the future going to be like. I'm trying to do my best to try to get these folks that are even smarter than me to look at these problems and look at them together wherever they are, being pretty agnostic to that, so we can ensure that better future. So yeah, I guess that's a big thing I try to aim for as well.
It's a fascinating set of things you've been involved in, Sean, and thinking about not just obviously the process automation, but the defense, national security, and then as you're saying, you bringing together cognitive neuroscience, bringing together tech and AI, dumping some humor into it. It's really a very elegant sort of convergent set of things you're involved in, and just really wishing you the best with all this, not just in your own work, what you're doing, but obviously you're mentioning training the next generation, because there are, as you were saying, these there's all these possibilities out there to how these different skill sets, which we might not normally think of, can be brought together to really address some of the big problems that we have headed our way, whether it's national security, whether it's health, and I think that's where the answers lie for a lot of this stuff at these intersections. So really, really exciting stuff. For everybody that is going to be listening to this particular episode on our podcast, or watching on the YouTube channel, you've been listening to Dr. Sean Guillory, Senior Robotics Process Automation Expert at Booz Allen Hamilton. Check out some of his scientific publications in the area of cognitive neuroscience. Check him out on the internet. Really a fascinating convergent expert type of folks that we really like to profile on our show. Sean, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us for a little while about all these really fascinating themes. Thank you for everything you're doing there at Booz Hamilton to keep us secure. And as we say on our show, thank you for helping to create a better tomorrow through everything you're involved in. Really very exciting stuff.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for the invite. I really appreciate it.
Talk again soon.